Salve te discipuli. Today we come to the conclusion of the Aeneid. When we last left off, Aeneas had gotten a personal stake in the war as Turnus had killed his ally Pallas, who Aeneas had been developing, fatherly feelings for, protective feelings toward, and he despoiled Pallas, and Aeneas rampaged across the battlefield. After Aeneas's rampage, he is approached by an emissary from the Latins who requests a truce for burying the dead on both sides. 12 days, very common kind of thing in these ancient wars. Aeneas agrees immediately to it, and they set off on their truce. With Pallas's body, he sends back 1,000 soldiers, a significant portion of his force, even with the reinforcements that he received from Evander and from some other local kings. And this impresses Evander to the point where he doesn't swear revenge on Aeneas. He wants his vengeance on Turnus because he knows that Pallas fought honorably and that Aeneas did what he could when Pallas was being sent into a situation that was dangerous no matter how you looked at it. The Latins are actually very impressed with Aeneas too. And in a council on the last day of the truce, they start talking with Turnus about this and pointing out that Aeneas, is a terrifying enemy, that he's leading people who are in a very strong position, and that Turnus is kind of at fault for this. There are people calling him out for apparently running away from the battlefield, even as he says he was tricked, the gods put him on there. They're not necessarily buying. They get some intelligence. A spy or a scout has told them that Aeneas is maneuvering his forces, that he split up his cavalry and his infantry and is maneuvering for the end of the truce, which is something you are allowed to do. But they decide that they're going to set an ambush for it and have Camilla, that warrior princess, lead it. Camilla fights very valiantly. She gets the initial drop on the Trojan forces, and she attacks on horseback and is throwing spears and fighting, as well as any man around there was, as Virgil puts it. But Camilla is dispatched. She gets slain by an arrow, shot off of her horse during this fight by a fighter named Aruns, who we'd never seen before, and gets killed very shortly afterwards in retaliation. Apparently, the goddess Diana, the huntress, the goddess of the moon, was rather fond of Camilla and didn't take lightly to her being killed on the battlefield. The attempt at this ambush is routed. It's not decisive. It doesn't create like a huge, gap in the Trojan lines. It doesn't trip them up for later. And at a council later that night, things start going badly for Turnus very quickly. His allies are deserting. They're blaming him for the whole war, that he couldn't hold on to his wife, and that it's not their fault because of this. Turnus had even sent messengers to a Greek king who'd settled in England named Diomedes. This guy had actually fought Aeneas at Troy and beaten him. That he was the guy who broke Aeneas's hip with the rock, as I mentioned a couple of chapters ago. Diomedes refuses to help them, says he wants nothing to do with this fight anymore. So no one is coming to support Turnus, and his own allies have told him that they're done with him at this point. And they said, we will support you up until the point where you fight Aeneas alone, and that's it. Juno is looking down on this and is extremely upset about it. She is holding her grudge. She doesn't like the idea that the Trojans are going to win. And Jupiter basically pleads with her one last time and says, listen, you can't keep fighting this. This is fate. We're not changing what's going on here. What will it take to get you to chill out here? And Juno asks for 3 conditions. First, when Aeneas wins and the Trojans settle there, that they intermarry with the Latins, the native people. That the Trojans assimilate into Italy and the Trojan language dies out. This is actually kind of a neat little bow on it because, well, Juno wins through marriage here. This is what placates her, and she's the goddess of marriage. Jupiter agrees to this, and it's kind of interesting because, well, modern readers hate the idea that the final battle's decided beforehand, even though we all kind of know the hero is going to win. But Virgil has no problem having literally the gods point out what is fated to happen right before it does. This is a feature in epic poetry a lot, and any suspense that comes out of this is how the resolution takes place. Turnus calls Aeneas out. They challenge. Aeneas accepts the challenge and a drawn-out duel. Turnus's mom was an immortal goddess, and a sister of his, who is a nymph, tries to help him at some point. Turnus has the wrong sword at the start. It shatters on Aeneas's shield, and he's, runs around for a while trying to get his new one, dodging, throwing spears, this kind of thing. It goes on for a while, but eventually Aeneas deflects a spear thrown by Turnus, and then throws one at Turnus that goes through Turnus's shield and into his thigh and cripples him, knocks him down. Turnus gives up. Lying there on the ground, bleeding heavily, looks up at Aeneas and says, "Spare my life, you win, keep Lavinia, war's over, I'm done." Aeneas looks down at Turnus and is about to do it until he sees what Turnus is wearing. With all Turnus's armor, with all of his distinctive stuff, is Pallas's distinctive belt. And Aeneas looks down, takes his sword, and kills Turnus right there. The last lines of the Aeneid have Turnus bleeding out in the dust and Aeneas standing over. Now, this is the end of the story. This is the last thing that Virgil wrote on the topic. And at first glance, it appears very satisfying. Aeneas has won. His set up to, found a dynasty that will last forever in Italy. His son is set up to be king, and he's got a wife. He ends up even naming the city after her traditionally. The place Lavinium becomes like the seat of his people for a while. And many, many generations later, you can trace back Romulus and Remus's ancestry all the way to him. It seems like it's got a neat little bow on it. But the thing is that there's something intensely disturbing about the ending here. You have to remember what Anchises told Aeneas to do when he was in the underworld. Literally the last piece of advice given to Aeneas by his dead father, something that he went to the underworld to get, was to not be like the Greeks and to spare the people you've conquered. Now, the book ends. The story, ends there. But people have been debating why Aeneas doesn't follow this last bit of advice, and whether, Anchises', prophecy about this, that the Romans would be, that the descendants of Aeneas would be prosperous and they would have an empire without end as long as Aeneas does this, if that still holds, considering that Aeneas has broken this. Now, these videos are here to summarize the Aeneid and not necessarily to go into a long discussion of any of this. But you really should be thinking about what's going on with the ending of that, why Aeneas wouldn't follow this advice at the very end of the story. Thank you guys for your attention. Thank you for watching this series. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys check out the other series on my channel, which is the Labors of Hercules.